From the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., this is the Tyler's Place podcast, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction of the United States of America, Mother Supreme Council of the world. And it's important that I make that statement right now because we are on the eve, on the cusp, if you will, of the 2019 Biennial session. This is the biennial meeting that we have, whereby the Supreme Council gets together. They all meet. They vote on things that are going to happen for the next biennium, and it's a very exciting time. And in particular, an exciting time this year, as our Grand Commander, currently the illustrious Brother Ronald A. Seal, is retiring from his Grand Commandership, so to speak, and we will have a new Grand Commander, and you will hear it and see it live as it happens. Just visit ScottishRite.org on Monday the 19th, beginning at 9 a.m., and you will see that whole transfer of power take place. We don't know who it is going to be yet. There will be a vote that takes place actually hours from now, not too far from where I'm sitting as I record this, and it is a very, very exciting time. So please make sure you stay tuned to the Tyler's Place feed, and we will keep you up to date with what's happening. Also, stay tuned to all the socials, Facebook, all of those things, and the Scottish Rite app. We will make sure that everything is where you can see it and where you as Scottish Rite Masons can basically witness it, even if you're not able to join us in Washington, D.C. All right, let's get into a little bit of our regular program. And I want to start by thanking all the brothers who I met up with when I was on vacation just a couple of weeks ago. I was back in Tennessee. And this time, I didn't just go to Memphis, although I did visit with my friends and brothers in Memphis. Shout out to the secretary there in the Valley of Memphis, Brother Gerald, good buddy of mine. And we had some burgers and hung out and checked out the new statue of Johnny Cash, so good times there. But while I was in Tennessee, I actually also snuck down to Clarksdale, Mississippi, and met with a couple of brothers down there. So big shout out to all the fellas in Clarksdale, and thank you guys for tuning in. And I had a very special visit in Nashville with a 33rd degree Grand Cross brother, Dan Jones. He's the Valley Secretary there in Nashville, and I had a chance to chat with him about an extraordinary Masonic building. It is right in downtown Nashville. If you have ever visited Nashville and you haven't looked up and noticed this giant square and compasses, I mean, really go to the eye doctor, because the thing is huge, and it's right in the middle of downtown, and it's a fascinating building, and I got a great chance to chat with Brother Dan and get a tour inside the Scottish Rite classroom in the Valley of Nashville, which is actually in the Grand Lodge building, but it started out as the Scottish Rite. So there's a little curious history there. The Grand Lodge bought the building after it was well, you should tell it better than me.
Okay, the building was, construction started in 1923 and was completed in 1925. The architect on the building was Christian Asmuth, who was a German immigrant that came to Nashville in the 1890s and started an architectural firm and was a member of the Scottish Rite in Nashville. He drew this building as a Scottish Rite temple. The Scottish Rite owned it and operated it with the Grand Lodge as a tenant, the Shrine as a tenant, the York Rite as a tenant, and the Eastern Star as a tenant until 1939. And then the Scottish Rite sold the building to the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, and the Scottish Rite became a tenant of the building.
And this is smack at the end of Music Row, essentially. I mean, where if you've ever seen a picture of where all the live music and the neon lights of Nashville are, you could throw a rock from there and hit the sign out front.
Well, that is true as far as the little pubs and the entertainment centers. Music Row, where the business of the music industry is housed, is about 9 or 10 blocks away from here. There's a Music Row East and a Music Row West. They are both one-way streets going opposite directions of each other, and all of the record companies and businesses are located in that area.
Now, the room we're in now is the classroom, the Scottish Rite classroom, and it's a beautiful building, it's a great space. So this is obviously used as a Blue Lodge as well, just to tell by the way it's set up.
It is. when the building was built, there were 3 lodges in Nashville looking for a new home, and the Scottish Rite of Nashville made a proposal to all 3 to build a lodge for them within this building. Only one lodge took them up on that offer, so they dropped a floor from the building and decided to make the Scottish Rite classroom a dual-purpose classroom and lodge hall. And Observance Lodge number 686 still operates here in Nashville, and they meet on Thursday nights.
It's such a beautiful spot, but the chair that is in the east looks from a distance rather unassuming. In fact, it looks a little odd. It's very low to the ground, very squat to the ground, but a very tall back. And I understand that a quite important person sat in this chair. He was important in a couple of different ways. So, Andrew Jackson?
That is correct. This was Andrew Jackson's chair that he used when he was Grand Master of Tennessee in the early 1820s. It is very low to the ground, which is in conjunction with the chairs in the Hermitage. He liked to sit in chairs that were low to the ground. He was a very tall person, but he liked to sit low to the ground.
And I sat in it. I'll tell you what, he wasn't wrong. It's not a bad way to sit if you're kind of, he was 6'1", 6'2", so I'm right around there. So I didn't feel like my knees were coming up. It was not, he was smart.
Yeah. And, at the Hermitage, which is, his home, in his study, there is a wooden reclining chair that is relatively low also. And beside his chair is a little table, and on that table is a book. The book was written by Wilkins Tannehill, who was our 3rd Grand Master, and it is a Masonic ritual book. Wilkins Tannehill is the one that wrote the Tennessee Craftsman, which is the Masonic ritual book for the state of Tennessee.
Now, I'm so glad you told me that, because we were at the Hermitage. We asked repeatedly, is there anything of a Masonic nature in or around the grounds? And repeatedly, the only thing we were told is there's a little sign in the garden next to the tomb, obviously placed there by the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, denoting him as a past Grand Master, and et cetera. But to know that there was something of Masonic importance there in his private study, and I guess they just, the current tour guides, they're all students, I would assume, that didn't know that. So that's a nice thing to know.
The curator of the Hermitage does know that. He is aware of it. I got to do a behind-the-glass tour of the Hermitage one time, and we were able to pick the book up and look at it. We have copies of it here in our vault for the Grand Lodge. Our ritual has gone through several upgradings and changes, but that is one of the original rituals for the state of Tennessee. We could handle the book with cotton gloves on, which is the same way we treat some of the volumes in our library here at the Scottish Rite Library. We make people use a cotton glove when they look at the books.
The way that you speak about this valley and about this building, your wealth of information, I was fortunate enough, I don't want to call it trivia because I don't think it's trivial. When we visited downstairs, and I guess it's a sort of a portrait gallery / library where there's a portrait of Andrew Jackson, a portrait of a lot of your early Grand Masters. You mentioned several of them served under Andrew Jackson, and one had a particular distinction that served as a colonel, and someone important to us as Scottish Rite Masons served under him. So speak about that if you could.
Well, that was our 9th Grand Master, who was Archibald Yale. He served under Andrew Jackson along with 3 other Grand Masters we had. One was Thomas Claiborne, our 1st Grand Master in 1813. One was right after Andrew Jackson served, and that was Cooper, who was an educator and a banker, and then Kennedy was an attorney that served as Grand Master after Cooper. Then a man named Dunlap served, who was in the Mexican War, but was not in the War of 1812 with Andrew Jackson. And then we get to Archibald Yale, who was an attorney. He was a member of our state legislature. He was Speaker of the House. He served under Andrew Jackson in 1812. When Jackson was elected president, he was appointed judge over Arkansas Territory by President Jackson. He later became Arkansas's second governor after they became a state. Then, because of his serving in the War of 1812, when Davy Crockett and some other Masons came down through there to scout for Andrew Jackson, that went on to the Alamo and were killed, he re-enlisted in the military. And in February of 1847, was killed at the Battle of Buena Vista. He had led the Arkansas Brigade to the Battle of Buena Vista. 6 months later, in August of 1847, men that served under him went back to Buena Vista, exhumed his body from the battlefield, and hauled him back to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and re-entombed him there in the city cemetery where his remains are today. The man that assumed command of the Arkansas Brigade when Archibald Yale fell in battle was not a Mason in 1847, but 3 years later became a Mason, and that was Captain Albert Pike.
Wow, that you have to take a step back and wonder, looking at the reverence that his men had for Yale, going and exhuming his body, returning him to Fayetteville. It's quite a long distance, especially at that time. There was no car, no airplane to put anybody on. That had to be quite an undertaking.
Horse and wagon.
Yeah, and quite a long way, and probably, unhospitable conditions. But it had to speak volumes to a young Captain Pike at that point in time, to at least arouse his curiosity. Why would these men do this for this other man, aside from his military service, aside from the comrades in arms, but the Brotherhood of Masonry?
That is correct. I do not have a list of the men that did that. I do not know if Albert Pike was included in that or not. I just know that he served under Colonel Yale and assumed command of the Arkansas Brigade in February of 1847 when Archibald Yale was killed.
I cannot thank Brother Dan Jones, 33rd Degree Grand Cross, enough. His hospitality and the hospitality of all the brothers in the Tennessee area was just extraordinary as always, and so good to get such an extraordinary tour, a fascinating building, and just good to hang out with a good brother like Brother Dan. So thank you, sir, and I hope to be back again very soon. Incidentally, a little side note, Brother Dan has a really, really cool piece of Scottish Rite. I don't want to call it memorabilia. It's not really regalia. It's an object, and it's a really cool object that I'm trying to encourage him to write an article about for the Scottish Rite Journal. I don't want to tip it away too much more than that, but hopefully you'll be seeing it very soon in the pages of the journal. Now let's turn to the 2019 Biennial session and get into a little bit of Q&A about that. Joining me now is Brother Arturo de Hoyos, the Grand Archivist. He joins us every month here on the Tyler's Place podcast. Always a good time to talk to Brother Art. Specifically, though, questions and answers about the Biennial session. Why, who, what, when, where, all of that. Art breaks it down for us. As we record this, we are hours away from the Biennial session of 2019 starting. It's a very exciting time.
It is. Like I've been telling my friends, the madness is about to begin.
It really is. There's a bit of an eerie calm over the temple right now because no one's coming to town really today. A couple people might trickle in here, but starting tomorrow, it's going to get, as the kids say, cray-cray up in here.
Absolutely. You look outside, you see the green clouds, you know the storm is coming.
So let's talk about this session and just in general. We've discussed in the past the reason we have a biennial session is because we didn't want to have an annual one because we couldn't do this to ourselves every year. But this session is special in particular because there's going to be, and what we always refer to as the peaceful transition of power from one Grand Commander to the next. Let's start with the outgoing Grand Commander. Obviously, you work with Grand Commander Seal, a lot of fond memories. As you look back over his, I guess, I don't want to say reign because he's certainly not a tyrant in any stretch, but as you look back over his stewardship, let's say, of the Scottish Rite, what are some highlights for you?
Well, for me personally, the Grand Commander and I share a very strong interest in Masonic education. And I just told him a couple of days ago that one of the things that I appreciated was the opportunity to develop the Master Craftsman program under his stewardship, as well as to publish many of the things that we did, including the annotated Morals and Dogma. I may have mentioned to you previously that Grand Commander sat in my office one day and said that we either needed to republish Morals and Dogma or stop talking about Albert Pike. And of course I understood its hyperbole, and that resulted in the annotated edition that we have now. But he's a person who has a strong passion for Masonic education and many other things. His work on wanting to restore the house of the temple, also noteworthy. But when you ask me, it's really the education, because for me personally, in the end, Freemasonry isn't about a building, it's about a philosophy.
Now, Grand Commander Seal, at the last biennium, at our last biennial session, at the end of it all, he announced to staff, that this was going to be his last go-round. He was going to retire after this biennium. So here we are. That point has arrived. This is 100% his decision. He's not being kicked out or anything like that. This is his call. What are the rules regarding? I know, like, Pike died with his boots on. He was still Grand Commander when he went out the door. And then there are a few like that have again died with their boots on. But what is the rule with regarding when a Grand Commander is caused to step down according to statute?
Well, things change over the years, of course. I believe that there's a mandatory retirement at age 80. I believe that you could probably get done pretty much everything that you need to by that age, and if not, then there's always a successor to do that. One of the more interesting things in our history is Frederick Dalco, who was the second Grand Commander of Scottish Rite. He was the first Lieutenant Grand Commander, and he retired, we say, in February 1822 because he could no longer support the Scottish Rite because of conflicts in the Grand Lodge. Is that he had a friend that was a member of the Surno Supreme Council. He was, in fact, Grand Master of the state of South Carolina. And Dalco had strong friendships on that side of the camp, and he just really didn't want to be involved in Masonic, peaks and quarrels and things. And so he actually refused to call the Supreme Council together. And so the council met without him and elected an acting Grand Commander, and we moved forward from there. So, as we do allow for a peaceful transition of power, and I should add that to Dalco's credit, he did come back. He remained an active member of the council, and I guess he licked his wounds a little bit, but we do find him signing patents and other papers as past Grand Commander, and he was happy with his association for the rest of his life. But I just don't think he was a person that he was a reverend, as you might remember, and that he just was not a person who wanted those kind of conflicts. But the Scottish Rite is really remarkable. This is a political season right now, and we see really a peaceful transition of power. I've always thought it would be kind of funny if you could line up the contestants like we do at conventions and have debates between those who vie for the office, and hear one person's plans versus the other. But that kind of amusement is best left for television and political parties and not Freemasonry.
So what will Grand Commander Seal's title be? Is he Grand Commander Emeritus? Is he past Grand Commander? What's the title?
Past Grand Commander.
Past Grand Master.
Absolutely. Like they always say about people in principal Masonic positions, they're probably past everything but redemption.
So the next question, moving on, now that we've thanked and ushered the past Grand Commander out the door, how is a new Grand Commander chosen? When does that happen? Does that happen? That we don't know who it is, technically speaking. There are people who say, "Oh, it's going to be this guy, it's going to be that," but how is that chosen?
We really don't know, and that's a decision made by the active members of the Supreme Council. They meet in an executive session the day before our opening ceremonies on Monday, so that'll be on Sunday. And they will meet in a private session and have a vote. And it's quite truthful that any member of the Supreme Council, technically, could be elected to the position of Grand Commander. And so we really don't know. You can maybe take some bets, think that one person has a higher probability than another. But when people ask me, I say, well, we'll just have to wait until the election to find out.
So we genuinely don't know, because we get those questions working here in the building. We get, hey, what do you know? They don't tell me. I just do the podcast and keep my mouth shut. Other than that, that's all I do. I don't bother the guys in the purple hats if I can help it.
Yeah, that's probably the safest route to go, especially this time of year.
So they are chosen, and then the announcement is made and shared with people, I would imagine, for a while. And then Monday morning, the gavel is handed over. What can we expect to see? And that I should mention to people, if you visit our website, scottishrite.org, on Monday morning, you will see a link there. You will be able to watch the entire biennial session live as it happens, live from the Capitol Hill. We've gone to great time and expense to make sure that is available for every brother of the Scottish Rite. Any person can watch it. It's a public ceremony, so anyone can watch at scottishrite.org. You'll just click the link. Portions of it, not the entire thing, but portions of it will be available on Facebook, so you'll be able to see it there as well. But what can we expect to see during that transition of power? Because it doesn't happen all that often.
It'll probably be as exciting as handing over a gavel. It's actually a very peaceful transition. As I said, I suppose that all the excitement happens in the executive session. But when all is said and done, all kidding aside, it's just literally, they vote a person in, they vote to sustain the person, and that's it.
Does it need to be unanimous?
As far as I understand.
Really? So what happens if they just keep whittling it down, or is there fighting? What happens?
Well, I'm not privy to that since I'm not an active member. But maybe it's majority rules. That's a really interesting question. I will have to look into that, but I cannot imagine, as we know how well the Supreme Council works together, that it would be anything less than unanimous in the end.
It's a really exciting time to be a Scottish Rite Mason and to watch what is happening and what is going on. The other thing I should mention is that we have a really exciting Q&A happening just after the big biennial session. So after Monday morning's events, we're all going to grab some lunch, and then we've got a huge number of guys coming for a question and answer period with you and Brent, and I'll be moderating, and we're going to record portions of it to share with podcast listeners. That's a really, fun thing to do. What would you say is the question you get asked most of all when people sit down in these Q&A sessions? What's the one? Let's tip our listeners a little early.
Probably why as you mentioned, this is immediately after lunch, and people often want to know why their dessert wasn't as large as it should be.
That's always a good question.
But honestly, that's a really difficult question.
Obviously, I get the ones like, how come there's 32 and not 15? And, and it's, we didn't want 35. It's a simple answer, but it's the truth. It's just like, why is there a biennial session? Because we didn't want to do it every year.
And a lot of them are very logical things like that. Those are very common questions without a doubt. People want to know sometimes, how can I become a 33rd degree Mason? Nobody knows the answer to that question. I guess the answer is work your butt off. And even then. But there's a lot of good questions that come up. Some are about philosophy. Some are about why things occur the way they do in ritual, or where did a particular ritual develop, So it's hard to say really what it would be the most common kind of a question. I am surprised every time that we've done this at how thoughtful and insightful some of the questions really are. Some of them are remarkable they're things that I had not thought about, honestly. And then we have, the brother just wants to take the mic and stand up and tell us his life story, and that's always exciting too. But it is an exciting time. Brent and I always enjoy the opportunity to speak with our brothers. And the important thing about this is that it is a Q&A. It's not pontificating. This is an opportunity to get some questions answered and get some Masonic education. My favorite questions when you guys do these things are the ones that, you really can only answer for yourself. Obviously you guys can speak about the history, you can speak about things that have been written and things, but when it comes to a personal, interpretation or personal use of a particular philosophy, I just told a group of entered apprentices last week at a presentation, nobody's more qualified than you are to speak about what this means to you. And Pike kind of lays that out in Esoterica and says, here's the meanings, this is what's been written, this is what I think, but ultimately you have to decide what this means for yourself because you are going to be using these tools. And those are the questions that when I'm left scratching my head going, what do I think about this? That I really enjoy. No, that's a good point. Freemasonry has been known known as the Royal Art. And that means a lot of things, of course, because, kings, dukes, and lords had belonged to it. But when you hear the word art, I think of real art and how every person who enters an art gallery kind of gets something different from the art that they, look at. So Masonry speaks to us quietly sometimes and individually. You and I will both watch the same degree, each walking away with a different lesson.
Hear what you shall hear.
Absolutely.
Every degree starts with those words. Hear what you shall hear, not what he should. Don't hear what you shall hear.
That's a good point.
And I to me that's I've always thought that even a grandmaster, somebody who's really studied, can only tell you what he thinks. But what this does to you when you see the square and compass, when you read the Sixth Degree, or when you study morals and dogma, what it means to you. Only you can determine that interpretation and how you incorporate that into your life. Because, we talk often in the Scottish Rite about the difference between, Pike is so good at this, difference between wisdom and knowledge. And the simple one I always go to is, knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. And I think that, Pike does a good job of saying, hey, listen, we're going to tell you tomato's a fruit. You have to figure out what salads it belongs in.
Yeah, there are certain fundamental truths that, all of us agree with.
Sure.
Or with which we all agree.
The universal truths.
Absolutely. And Freemasonry speaks those, in our degrees to us, very clear about what the meaning in a particular degree is, about the square or the compasses or one of the other working tools. But that's a very base understanding, of course. And, that's just basic classroom instruction. It's once we leave the classroom that we find out those other applications of the tools. How is it useful to us? That's well said.
And we will see and hear more of Brother Arturo de Hoyos throughout the Biennial Session weekend. Again, keep your eye on the social media and keep your eye on the Tyler's Place podcast feed for exclusive interviews, for audio clips, and we are going to carry portions of the Biennial Session live on the Tyler's Place feed. Plus, we will also bring you bits and pieces of the Q&A with the illustrious Brother S. Brent Morris, who is the editor-in-chief of the Scottish Rite Journal and also author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry, and our grand archivist and best buddy here on the Tyler's Place podcast, Art de Hoyos. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to bringing you guys along on the ride. So stay tuned all weekend long to the Tyler's Place podcast feed, to the social media, the Scottish Rite app. Oh, by the way, download the Scottish Rite app. You can go in your app store right now. It's free. Members only, though. So if you're not a Scottish Rite member, find a Mason in your area, ask him how you can become one. He'll definitely hook you up. In the meantime, ready for Biennial Session 2019. I'm your host, Maynard Edwards, 32nd Degree KCCH with the Tyler's Place podcast. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place.